Precious cornerstone, sure foundation, you are faithful to the end. We are waiting on you, Jesus. We believe you're all to us. Only Son of God, sent from heaven, hope and mercy at the cross. You are everything, you're the promise. Jesus, you are all to us. Let the glory of your name be the passion of the church. Let the righteousness of God be the holy flame that burns. Let the saving love of Christ be the measure of our lives. We believe you're all to us. When this passing world is over, we will see you face to face, and forever we will worship Jesus. You are all to us. Let the glory of your name be the passion of the church. Let the righteousness of God be a holy flame that burns. Let the saving love of Christ be the measure of our lives. We believe you're all to us. You're all to us. You're all to us. You're all to us. Jesus, you are all to us. Let the glory of your name be the passion of the church. Let the righteousness of God be a holy flame that burns. Let the saving love of Christ be the measure of our lives. We believe you're all to us. We believe you're all to us.
Some of the more sobering images from 9/11 are of firefighters and policemen who responded to the events of that day and show up on the scene. And what's amazing about what these guys do, and we use the term first responders. In fact, that phrase, first responders, really gained some ground after the events of 9/11. What happens is they run toward danger when everyone else is leaving, right? Fleeing danger. And for those who are fleeing danger, that's not a knock on them. That's what they should be doing. They should be getting out of there while the first responders run towards danger while those other people flee that danger. Maybe you've seen this picture before, but in the red circle is one of the fire trucks that was headed towards 9/11. And you can see people. It's kind of a small picture. But this is the last picture. I forget the exact number of this particular fire engine. But it was headed there, and all 6 men on board died that day. In fact, this is a picture of that truck as it was there. The guys were inside the buildings as they fell. But we've actually got a picture of it on its way toward danger. When everybody else was fleeing danger, they were headed towards danger. And isn't that what first responders do? This is a picture, a kind of a famous picture from 9/11 of a specific firefighter who was coming in as everybody else was going out. This guy actually survived, and the guy who took the picture and the firefighter both survived. But it's an amazing example of what a first responder does. And we're thankful for all of our first responders in our community, even here as a part of our congregation. A first responder runs toward danger when everybody else is fleeing danger. It happens with events like this. It happens with 9/11, with fires, with disasters, with any sort of a shooting. Or I think about COVID and the first responders who early on went into situations when we didn't really know anything about it, and it was bad. Man, it's amazing that first responders, there it is. A first responder runs toward danger while others are running away from danger. As we walk through the book of Acts, isn't it amazing how Paul seems to be the kind of guy who just repeatedly does this, doesn't he? He's just repeatedly running towards danger while other people are running away from danger, while other people are even saying, Paul, don't go there. I mean, he gets persecuted in a city, he gets stoned in a city repeatedly, or gets run out of town. And then what's he do? We read later that he goes back to those cities. Or I think about Ephesus, where there's 20,000 people in a theater screaming and chanting, and they drag some of Paul's friends into that theater, and Paul says, I want to go in there. It takes some political leader friends of Paul to say, Paul, that is not a good idea. This is one area in which you don't need to be running towards this danger. Throughout the book of Acts, Paul has been running towards danger, running towards danger, running towards difficulty. And if we're honest, as 21st century Christians in West Tennessee, I'm not sure we respond to danger and difficulty in that way. In many cases, we do the opposite, don't we? We try to make things as comfortable and easy as we possibly can, and we tend to shy away from difficulty and danger. In fact, we are risk averse. We've got a couple insurance agents around here, right? We, as Westerners, Americans, man, we're really concerned about risk and staying away from risk and safety. And because of that, I think it bleeds over into our faith, and sometimes we push away and we run away from difficulty and danger. And you read in the book of Acts, guys like Paul and others, man, they're running right towards it. And so what's it look like for us today as we think about danger and difficulty and following Jesus and admit then, man, sometimes I shy away from what's difficult and I want things to be comfortable and easy. We're coming into Acts chapter 21. And really what happens here in Acts chapter 21 and beyond is the story transitions from the incredible growth of the church and Paul's missionary journeys. And this is actually the end of Paul's third missionary journey. And from here on out, it's basically the story of Paul in Jerusalem, how the Jews want to kill him, but the Romans protect him and take him through a series of trials that leads him to Rome. That's the rest of the book. The rest of the book of Acts. In fact, the rest of the book of Acts is kind of weird, because I'm guessing that we're going to look at some stories over the next couple of months or so, next few weeks. We're going to do some other things over the next few weeks. When our students get back, we'll have a short series. But through the rest of the year, as we come in and out of the book of Acts, we're going to be watching Paul run through or go through this series of trials that leads him to Rome. And there are going to be some stories that I'm guessing, even if you've been in church for a while, you haven't heard before or have only heard once or twice. These are some of the most underutilized passages in Acts, but I promise you, they're challenging and they're inspiring, because here's what we're going to see. We're going to see some persecution, and I guess we're kind of tired of that. Like in the book of Acts, it's just like persecution, and we might be like, well, good grief, is this, we've talked about this a lot, but here's what's amazing about the rest of the book of Acts. We get to watch Paul on his own wrestle with and deal with some of this. And we get to see him finagle his way out of some tough situations. There are times that he's not just like running straight into persecution. There are times he appeals to his Roman citizenship and says, I'm not doing this. You can't do this to me. There's times he does that. There are times he uses his difficulty to share his faith. And so what we get to watch over the next 7 or 8 chapters of Acts is we get to watch Paul run towards danger. And I think what's especially challenging, and the reason we need this, is because our tendency is to run away from difficulty and danger. I hope you have your Bibles open. Acts chapter 21. We're going to pick up in verse 1. And I've got a map on the screen. James, do you have the ability to highlight? Like, you've never tried. I'm totally putting you on the spot right here. But you're my brother, so I don't care. I'll put you on the spot. Right? Can you do that? Does it do that thing where you like do something? Never mind then. Because I don't have a laser. So you guys have to work kind of hard. You see kind of right there in the middle of the screen, there's a little yellow island called Kos. You got that? If I could jump up there. Oh, look, we do have a little thing up right in the middle, Kos. Not a good job, James. Never mind. Right there in the middle, there's Kos. Anyway, that's where we're picking up. So you can follow that red line from Kos. Here we go. And when we had parted from them and set sail, we came by a straight course to Kos. Right, there's Kos. And the next day to Rhodes, see in big bold letters there, Rhodes, that's the next island he comes to. And from there to Patara. See Patara on the coast. And then it's easy from here on out. We're just going to go out into the ocean, in the Mediterranean, right? So, and having found a ship crossing to Phoenicia, we went aboard and set sail. When we had come in sight of Cyprus, leaving it on the left. Doesn't that sound like a sailor? He says, we left Cyprus on the left. What's that mean? They went south of Cyprus, right? You can actually see which direction they're going around the island. Luke says, yeah, it was off there to the left, which means we went to the south of Cyprus, all right? So they go to the south of Cyprus, and leaving it on the left, we sailed to Syria and landed at Tyre, all right? So we're down here on the coast, all the way down here, and you see Tyre where that red line is, and you can follow the cities as we move on down there. For there the ship was to unload its cargo, and having sought out the disciples, we stayed there for 7 days. So again, imagine you're Paul and you're Luke and you're the group of guys that's with Paul and Luke, and you land here, and from what we don't have any understanding or we don't have any reason to say that Paul's ever been there before. So maybe this is the first time that he's meeting the Christians in Tyre, and they stay there for a week. Look at the second half of verse 4. And through the Spirit, they were telling Paul not to go on to Jerusalem. So somehow, the Spirit had revealed to them that if Paul went to Jerusalem, it wasn't going to turn out very well. I don't think the Spirit is telling them to tell Paul, don't go, but they just know that it's not going to turn out very well, and so they say, Paul, you can't go. Well, you can't tell Paul to stop going somewhere. He's running towards danger sometimes. Verse 5, when our days there were ended, we departed and went on our journey, and they all, listen to this beautiful, intimate little scene. They all, with wives and children, accompanied us until we were outside the city. Can't you just picture this? And kneeling down on the beach, we prayed and said farewell to one another. And we went on board the ship and they went home. Wow, isn't that a beautiful, can't you just picture Paul and these Christians from Tyre kneeling down on the beach, praying together? They knew that perhaps this is the last time they're ever going to see Paul. So they get on another ship, verse 7, we had finished the voyage from Tyre. We arrived, so they're moving down the coast. We arrived at Ptolemais, and we greeted the brothers, stayed with them for one day. And on the next day, we departed and came to Caesarea. And we entered the house of Philip the evangelist, who was one of the 7, and stayed with him. He had 4 unmarried daughters who prophesied. Now, those 4 unmarried daughters that prophesied, this is a reminder that it wasn't just men who had the miraculous gifts of the Holy Spirit. All right? That's really all the text says here, but it's a reminder. This is not just, it's men and women who have these miraculous manifestations of the Spirit. But we might miss a detail here if we don't look too close. Who is this Philip guy? Remember back in Acts chapter 6 when the Greek-speaking Jewish widows weren't getting taken care of? And the Greek speakers said, hey, our people aren't being taken care of. And so the apostles say, well, let's appoint 7 guys to take care of them. Some people say they were kind of like the first deacons. Philip was one of those guys. And so Philip, from Jerusalem, because of persecution, gets run out of Jerusalem. In fact, go back to chapter 8. Back up to Acts chapter 8. Watch what happens with Philip. Same Philip we're running into here in chapter 21. Chapter 8, verse 3. But Saul was ravaging the church, and entering house after house, he dragged off men and women and committed them to prison. Now those who were scattered went about preaching the word. Who's that include? Verse 5. Philip went down to the city of Samaria and proclaimed to them Christ. You get to the end of the chapter 8, verse 40, he's preached to the Ethiopian eunuch, but Philip found himself at Azotus, and as he passed through, he preached the gospel to all the towns until he came where? To Caesarea. How about that? That's where we find him all these chapters later, 20 years later. It's a guess, our best guess, that this is 20 years later. He's still in Caesarea, and he's still Philip the evangelist. Now let's stop here for a second. Paul stays in his house. Paul was responsible for Philip having to leave his home in Jerusalem. It is, I would say, very, very likely that Paul was responsible for the imprisonment and deaths of people that Philip knew. maybe even some of his family members. And now Philip says to Paul, come on into my house, and they stay there for several days, or at least a little bit of time. What kind of grace does it take to look somebody in the face who killed people you knew and say, you're my brother and I welcome you in now? Only when you've been transformed by the incredible grace of God can you forgive like that. Isn't it sad that we let the littlest things put barriers up between us, and we hold grudges over the littlest, silliest things? But true Christian family means that we put those things in the past. Now, I'll go ahead and admit it here. It took Philip, this is 20 years late. Philip's got 20 years to get over things here. So, right, so he's got a little bit of time, and time heals all wounds, we say, to some extent. But isn't it amazing that Philip invites into his house the guy who was responsible for throwing his life into upheaval? It's amazing. But watch how this plays out. Watch what happens next. This is one of those weird stories in Acts. Verse 10. While we were staying for many days, a prophet named Agabus came down from Judea. And coming to us, he took Paul's belt and bound his feet and hands. Now just imagine a prophet comes in here and tries to take my belt. Well, we're probably stopping things right there, because that's going to get weird. And I'm going to be like, you're not touching my belt. So Dad, we're going to have you, I'm just kidding, we're not going to do a demonstration of this. This is kind of strange. But he takes Paul's belt, and watch what he does with it. This is the middle of verse 11. He takes his belt, and he bound his own feet and hands and said, thus says the Holy Spirit, this is how the Jews at Jerusalem will bind the man who owns this belt and deliver him into the hands of the Gentiles. What a demonstration. This is an object lesson, right? He takes Paul's belt, ties up his own hands and feet, and says, this is what's happening to you if you go to Jerusalem. So watch how everybody responds. Verse 12, when we heard this, that's Luke, that's the guys that are with Paul. When we heard this, we and the people there, so Philip and his guys, urged him not to go up to Jerusalem. They say to Paul, man, you can't go there. But listen to what Paul says. Verse 13, then Paul answered, what are you doing? You ever said that to somebody before? What are you doing? What are you doing? Weeping and breaking my heart, for I am ready. Highlight those words in your mind. I am ready, not only to be imprisoned, but even to die in Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus. What incredible, bold, courageous faith. And a reminder for us today is we need to develop a courageous faith. If you're going to live out your faith at work, if you're going to live out your faith at school, if you're going to live out your faith in your community, wherever you're going to go, it's going to take courage. It's not going to be easy. Like Paul, we need to develop a courageous faith that says, I am ready regardless of what happens. And watch how Luke and everybody else responds. Verse 14, and since he would not be persuaded, we ceased and said, let the will of the Lord be done. I think there's a reminder there that sometimes, let me go here first. How did Paul develop this sort of courageous faith? How do you get to a point where you can say, like Paul, I am ready for whatever comes my way? I think we find the answer right here in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, where Paul says, we don't lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. Maybe there's the key. If you want to develop a courageous faith, you've got to start looking at, paying attention to the things that are unseen, not just the things that are seen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. But I love this response. Luke says, we decided just to submit to the will of the Lord. Sometimes we need to be more resolved, and we should resolve ourselves to accept the will of God, even if it's difficult. Now listen, this is not a feel-good statement. Right? Nobody's walking out of here saying, okay, that makes me feel great. I need to resolve to accept the will of God even in difficult times. I get that. This is tough stuff. But I think we learned this valuable lesson from. So what do we do with this? It's a strange story. Paul's like, I'm ready to die for Jesus. And here in 21st century America, we're like, what do we do with this? But I'm reminded again that Paul's like a first responder, isn't he? Just over and over again, he's running towards danger while others are running away from danger. When we visit national parks, after we leave the national park, it's usually a big road trip, I do this really weird thing. And as I say it, as it comes out of my mouth right now, I'm realizing just how weird it is. All right, so you guys can think I'm a complete weirdo. But I download an audio book about that park, about all the people who've died in that park, and I make everybody in my car listen to it. These are the books, right? Death in Acadia, Death in Glacier, Death in Yellowstone, and you're looking at me saying, you are a weird dude. But we've listened to these, right? And my kids don't always love it, but I don't really care. And it's fascinating to hear about, through these audiobooks, people who have been, in many cases, foolish in where they've gone and how they've behaved in national parks, in places that we've just stood. And it's a lesson, right? But that's the side point. That's the weird thing that I do. What's amazing about these books and these stories is over and over and over again, you've got park rangers and local rescue people who are on the ready to do whatever it takes to save people who in many cases have done stupid things, who've tried to climb a mountain that they were not qualified to climb, who tried to go out on a hike without sufficient water, who jumped in some water or stood too close to a river or stood too close to an ocean. And now you've got all these park rangers then who have to come to the rescue of people who've done foolish things, but they are ready and they're running towards danger and jumping in dangerous rivers and jumping in oceans and climbing over cliff faces to rescue people. They're ready. And don't you love this phrase right here in Acts 21, where Paul says, I am ready, which is what a first responder is. Maybe the best lesson we can learn from this passage today is simply this. We need to be the kind of people that run toward difficulty, or fill in the blank, whatever difficulty you want to put in there, while others are running away. I'll say it again and let it sink in. We need to be the kind of people, as disciples of Jesus Christ, that run toward difficulty while others are running away. Now, here's what I know. It's not an easy message today. And as I put this on the screen, I want you to know that I struggle with this too. As a comfortable American Christian, it's not for most of us, it's not natural to run towards difficulty. We like to run the opposite way. But as we read the book of Acts, and we read the story of the New Testament, and we read about what Jesus has done for us at the cross, you just get this consistent message that followers of Jesus aren't afraid of difficulty. And sometimes they even run toward it. So let's fill in the blank. Sometimes we need to be the kind of people that run toward difficulty, sometimes even persecution, while others are running away. Now here's the deal, we don't need to be foolish. We're going to see throughout the rest of the book of Acts that sometimes Paul does what he can to get out of it. But if it glorifies God, I need to be the kind of person that's not afraid to run towards what's difficult. Or what about this one? Sometimes difficulty is just awkwardness. If you're going to be serious about your faith, you are going to have some awkward conversations. Sometimes those conversations might be confrontational. Sometimes those conversations just might be evangelistic. If you're talking about your faith, that's going to make other people uncomfortable, and it's going to be awkward. If you are afraid of awkwardness, then maybe Christianity isn't for you. Because as our culture increasingly becomes not Christian, things are going to get more awkward. Are you willing to embrace you ever known somebody just kind of embraces awkward situations? When we're cringing, right? It's like, this makes me really uncomfortable. They just embrace it. There are times when, as followers of Jesus, sometimes we're going to have to embrace the awkward. Sometimes the difficulty is going to be people who are different than us. We need to be the kind of people that run towards people who are different while others are running away. Just yesterday, I stopped at a gas station off the interstate, and there was a guy at the entrance of the gas station that was acting pretty strange. And you know what happens when there's a guy like that standing at the entrance of the gas station acting strange? Everybody puts their head down and like walks, does the circle around him. And I did too, right? I'm not talking about you have to go talk to strange people at gas stations off the interstate. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about here. But on a day-to-day basis, we interact with and know people who are different than us. Or maybe people who are just different from most people. Did you know that those people probably more than anyone else need our compassion and our love? And they're not getting much of it because most people are running away from them, aren't they? We've all been there where we're kind of running away from that difficult situation, that difficult person, that different person. We run away. Jesus seemed to run towards those kind of people. And as his followers, we should too. Listen, guys, at school, you just experiencing just this week, right? There's going to be some people who are different that everybody else is running away from. Will you run toward them? I'm guessing you probably work with some folks who are different, who are difficult to work with, who a lot of people avoid and run away from. They need Jesus. And they need compassion probably more than anybody else that you know at work or at school because they're not getting it from other people. What would it look like to run toward people like that? We need to be the kind of people that run toward difficulty and sometimes even dirty service opportunities while others are running away. I didn't put the word dirty in here because it didn't fit all on one line. So just add the word dirty here. Aren't there some service opportunities that you come upon on a daily basis or a weekly basis and you think, oh, I could help here, but this is going to be messy. Maybe not even physically messy, but emotionally messy, right? Sometimes physically messy. And what do we do when we run into those situations? What do you do? There's a lot of people in our world that are running away from those situations. As followers of Jesus, as good stewards of our time, will there be times that maybe we should be saying yes to those? Maybe so. I'm not saying you have to run headlong into every difficult situation that you come across. What I am saying is that as followers of Jesus, maybe we should be more open to the possibility of running towards difficulty, at least occasionally, instead of always running away from it. Some of you kids went back to, a bunch of you kids went back to school this week, right? At some point, you're going to have to embrace a hard class. Tucker, we're going to miss you going to Harding this week, right? Leaving this week. I'm guessing that you're going to take some I'm sorry, I'm embarrassing you on the spot. Not sorry. But you're going to have the opportunity to take a hard class or two, right? Yeah. What happens when you take a hard class or you do something difficult? You grow from it, don't you? Maybe it's possible that running headlong into some difficult situations sometimes will help us to grow and to become more like Jesus Christ. Paul says, I am ready, not only to be in prison, but even to die in Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus. I'm guessing that most of us are not as mature as Paul here. Most of us perhaps couldn't say this statement right here. And that's okay. Even Paul's companions say, no, you don't need to go here. Don't do this. But then they kind of give in to what Paul's going to do regardless. Here's the challenging statement that I want to encourage you to think through today. And I think this lands differently with different people depending on your life circumstances. But what if everyone here at least thought through this and began to move towards this statement? I am ready to run toward difficulty while others are running away. Again, I don't know where this lands with you, but what would it look like for you to at least begin to start saying, I'm not going to just be all about being comfortable. I'm going to start running towards difficulty. Follow the example of Paul and really follow the example of Jesus himself. I heard somebody say this week something about a blank check. And for some of you, you're like, I don't even know what a blank check is, right? I know we're moving away from checks, but we'll run with it anyway. What would it look like for you to be able to say something like this? I'm willing to write God a blank check with my life. Now, I know that this is kind of extreme. And you're like, really? We all have jobs. We have life circumstances. But isn't that a challenging thing to think through? What would it look like for me to be able to say, God, here I am, whatever you want. You know what this would mean? This would mean that you're ready to move toward difficulty sometimes. C.S. Lewis made this statement in one of his many books. He said this: I didn't go to religion to make me happy. I always knew a bottle of port, it's a bottle of wine, would do that. If you want a religion to make you really comfortable, I certainly don't recommend Christianity. What would it look like for all of us to live the kind of lives that at least move towards the attitude that said, I'm ready to run towards difficulty and towards difficult people and difficult situations while others are running away, not for my own glory, not so that I can win a blue ribbon or get some sort of medal, but for the glory of God and for the sake of the kingdom. Imagine the impact we could make on this world if we at least started moving towards having this kind of an attitude. In reality, isn't this what Jesus did? Didn't he run towards, in a sense, the cross? Like Tim described so well for us this morning. He ran towards sacrifice for me and for you. Because of that, we offer an invitation. If there's anything we can do to help you, won't you come as we stand and sing together?